Hey folks, and welcome to the last video of chapter 16, where we get to talk about the regulation of hormone release. So hormones are going to be regulated by a negative feedback loop. So what is a negative feedback loop? Basically means when something goes too high or too low, your body's going to trigger a response to push it back toward normal. And we can even go back to our overall homeostatic control. As we see here, we kind of have a seesaw here where everything's in balance. And when we have any type of imbalance, it's going to trigger a response to get back to balance. So you would need a stimulus, some type of receptor, input, control, output, effector, and then some kind of response or action. And that's what we're used to. We even saw this type of integration control with the nervous system. We're talking about, okay, we're going to have some type of stimulus again through a receptor. We're going to have integrative control, and then we're going to have some type of motor output. All that was helping us understand how we get back to homeostasis or how we process information in the brain. When it comes to our endocrine system, we're going to be focused on this type of negative feedback loop, which is very similar to what we see with homeostatic control. Okay? Now, do we have to go through stimulus, receptor, input, afferent pathway? No. We're really going to just see, okay, what's the stimulus, what's the receptor, what's the control center, what's the effector, and then what response do you have in the actual body when it comes to that particular hormone. And this is going to help us maintain hormone levels within a very narrow range. But guess what? All stimulus are not the same. There's going to be some type of stimulus that are coming specifically from a change in like ions or nutrients in the blood. There's going to be some that are coming from nerve impulses, and also some that come from another gland. Okay, so some hormones are going to be from another gland. All these stimulus are going to help trigger a target organ response that's going to inhibit its further in its release. Get into these three types of endocrine stimuli. First, we have humoral stimulus, and their trigger is going to be changing levels of ions or nutrients in the blood. Remember, we're talking about chemical messengers or hormones, so they are moving through the blood, and we can sense changes in ions or nutrients in the blood to help, of course, trigger that response of a receptor, and then, of course, a control center, then an effector, then an overall action to get back to homeostasis. One example is the stimulus is a low concentration of calcium ions in the blood, and the response is the parathyroid glands that are going to be posterior of the thyroid itself is going to secrete the parathyroid hormone, which is going to then increase calcium in the blood. We also have a neural stimulus, which means the trigger is going to be a nerve impulse. So one stimulus can be some type of action potential in the sympathetic fibers that are going to the adrenal medulla, which is going to be the basically the inside of the adrenal gland. Then you have the cortex on the outside of it. And the response of the adrenal gland is to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine and say, hey, we're actually dealing with some type of stressor, and so we need to make sure we're going to get back in balance. And then next, we're going to have the hormonal stimulus. And this is going to be hormone release caused by another hormone. And so one of the big ones we talked about was the anterior pituitary gland. And we know it's going to have effects on the thyroid gland, adrenal gland, and of course the gonads as well. Stimulus, well, the stimulus is coming from the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to tell the anterior pituitary what to do or what particular hormones to release. And then those hormones that are released can act on the other endocrine glands. Okay, and what are they going to do? They're going to stimulate the release of their own hormones. There's different types of stimuli throughout these throughout the blood, right? That's going to help the endocrine system do its job. And if anything is out of whack, then of course we're trying to get back to homeostasis. So that stimulus is going to cause us to get back into balance when we see any type of imbalance. Now, the nervous system can modulate this as well. It can override any kind of feedback to maintain homeostasis. So if you know you're producing a lot of this particular hormone, they can say, okay, let's inhibit the production of that hormone. So for example, we know the hypothalamus has the ability to suppress the anterior pituitary. And if it suppresses the anterior pituitary, it can then suppress the acting on other endocrine glands, which then going to suppress the release of certain hormones. An example of this is when you're dealing with stress or you're dealing with a high amount of cortisol coming from the adrenal cortex, then the hypothalamus is going to actually help increase blood glucose. Remember I was telling you that cortisol is connected to blood glucose. And why would it do that? Yes, it can suck for those with diabetes because, again, you're trying to lower your blood sugar and it just keeps increasing. But when you're in stress, it's going to want to fuel activity, movement, so you can actually try to get out of the particular stress or situation you're in. Okay, so that's one way we can think of the nervous system kind of modulating that. Let's get into some more examples, though. So we're going to focus on the calcium negative feedback loop. We're going to be focusing on the parathyroid gland. And the parathyroid glands are those four little glands that are on the posterior side of the thyroid itself. And so normally we have a calcium homeostasis of 9 to 11 milligrams per 100 mil. And if you have a decrease in calcium levels, then that is going to cause a stimulus. Now, what kind of stimulus are we talking about? Well, since we're talking about ion here, we know we are dealing with a humoral stimulus, okay? The humoral stimuli. So you're going to have a decrease in blood glucose, or excuse me, a decrease in blood calcium levels. The receptor is going to be these calcium sensing receptors that are on the parathyroid cells. So these parathyroid cells have, these parathyroid glands have these parathyroid cells on them that are going to detect when you have a decrease in calcium, okay? And so that receptor then is going to go through an afferent pathway to the control center. What's the control center? The parathyroid gland itself. And what is it going to do? Is going to release parathyroid hormone, okay? This parathyroid hormone is then going to go through an efferent pathway to the effectors, which are going to be osteoclasts. And what are the osteoclasts going to do? They're going to degrade the bone matrix, and release calcium into the blood. So now you have free calcium roaming in the blood. And what is that going to do? Increase blood calcium levels and get back to homeostasis. So that's the little negative feedback loop we have here. Okay, the goal is to get back to homeostasis. Of course, you can do the opposite of this. When you have an increase in blood calcium levels, then it's going to be the thyroid gland that's then going to release the hormone calcitonin. That's going to stimulate calcium salt deposits onto the bone. It's going to, of course, trigger calcium to be stored in the bone. And then again, that's how we're going to remove calcium from the actual blood to get back to homeostasis. So there's two different ways here we can have negative feedback loops when it comes to calcium. Let's look at another one, which is going to be blood glucose regulation, all about the pancreas. So when it comes to blood glucose, a negative feedback loop, we have our pancreas here, and we can either have an increase in blood glucose or we have a decrease in blood glucose. So if you have very, very high blood glucose or blood sugar levels, your pancreas is going to release insulin from the beta cells. So the pancreas themselves are going to have our alpha and beta cells. The beta cells are going to produce insulin. That insulin is going to stimulate glycogen formation. So that means it's going to take all that sugar that's in our blood and it's going to store it in the liver, or it can take that sugar and just uptake it in the cells itself or the tissues of the cell. And if you're getting rid of glucose that's kind of hanging out in the blood, then it can decrease our blood sugar level back to 90 milligrams per 100 mils, which is the normal blood glucose level. The opposite side of that, if you have a decrease in blood glucose, then your stimulus is going to be that decrease, okay? And we're thinking about this, well, what kind of stimulus would it be? Would it be humoral, would it be neural, or would it be hormonal? Neural stimulus is all about nerve impulses. This doesn't include any nerve impulses. We're directly looking at the pancreas here as our control center, and again, as where we're going to have our receptors. And then when you're thinking of hormonal, we're not asking another endocrine gland to do anything. I mean, it's all in the pancreas here. So this would definitely be a humoral stimulus, similar to the calcium one we saw before. Okay? So when you have a decrease in blood glucose, that's going to be our humoral stimulus. Again, you're out of balance. So the pancreas is going to have to do what? It's going to have the receptors, which are going to be our alpha cells, that are then going to produce glucagon. What is glucagon going to do? It's going to stimulate glycogen breakdown. So the glycogen is now going to be broken down from the liver into glucose. That glucose is going to be released in the blood, and you're going to increase your blood glucose to get back to homeostasis or the normal level. So there's a lot of regulation that's going to be involved with these hormones. A lot of it goes back to, let me go back to this, our general homeostatic control system that we've seen from the beginning of the course. We have some type of stimulus. There's three types: humoral, neural, or hormonal. Then we have a receptor that is going to understand that stimulus, and it's going to go through an afferent pathway to the control center, which is going to tell us what to do. It's going to take that message and say, hey, here's what we need to do. It's going to go through an afferent pathway to an effector, and that effector is going to elicit a response to get back in balance. And that is the whole entire goal of how we're going to regulate hormonal release. All right, folks, that's the end of chapter 16. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.